All right, off we go. So, new set of slides today. Because of the holiday, we cannot have a programming lecture this week. So sad. So we're going to talk about some interesting logical things, fallacies, and then talk about like crime and other topics. But fallacies are important. Let's study those first. All right. So, what in the world is a fallacy? Is maybe the main question. If you've never heard of this term, it's a mistake that you can make when you're arguing. If you have a fallacy in your argument, that means it's immediately wrong. And a fallacy is just essentially an argument that's not allowed. It's not logical, it's not correct. And so this will help me answer this question for you today. Any argument that contains a fallacy is, by definition, immediately wrong. You cannot trust it. And you can yell at the person all that you want because they need to give you a better argument. Okay? So yeah, what is a fallacy? A fallacy is, like I've been saying, it's when you make a mistake when you're arguing something. And the adjective version of that fallacy is the noun. The adjective version, when you have an argument, you say that it is fallacious. Okay, that means it has a fallacy in it. Automatically false. That argument is wrong. You can't trust it. You better, if you're the one who just gave your argument with a fallacy in it, you better change your argument and get rid of that fallacy. Otherwise, nobody should ever believe you. That was an incorrect argument. Okay? Fallacies are all around us. That's why we're talking about them in this class. Like, people use fallacies every day. And then other things that try to sell you stuff or try to convince you of things, like corporations who want you to buy things, governments who want you to believe things. They use fallacies to manipulate you because their arguments sound correct, but really they're subtly wrong, and you shouldn't be trusting them. So I want you to be able to see through that, and that's a main feature of this class. All right? And so that is why we're learning about it as well. Also, you can't just say in this class, I'll give you a 0, you can't just say that, oh, that argument has a fallacy in it, and then call it a day. Every fallacy has a name, and you must mention the name to prove to me that you understand that there really is a fallacy in the argument in the test question or whatever, okay? So keep that in mind. Every fallacy has a name, and you must mention the name of the fallacy. This is not like informal. This is a very formal thing in this class. All right, every fallacy has a name. It doesn't just mean bad argument. There's a specific kind of fallacy to describe this particular bad argument. Example. Okay, that's what's going on there. So don't forget that. There's always a name to every fallacy. And with that, let me give you a few different kinds. I'll teach you a few different kinds today, and then eventually I'll give you an essay where you just go off and find fallacies on the internet, and you can pick any one. There's like a big Wikipedia page with a bunch of lists of different kinds of fallacies. So you'll learn about plenty more after this as well. All right. So here's the first kind of fallacy that I want to teach you. It's called the false dilemma fallacy. It's also called false dichotomy. You might hear it's called that as well. Another term to describe it is the black and white fallacy. It's like claiming that the world is black and white when really there's shades of gray. Black and white fallacy. And here is, let's see. Here is what it is. A false dilemma fallacy is when you have an argument that is pretending that there's only two options, A or B, when in reality there's option C and they're not telling you about it, okay? There are more than just those two possibilities. That's the key. It's like claiming that the world is black and white when really it's gray. Pretending that you only have two choices, but really that's not true. Okay, that's the false dilemma fallacy. And so any argument that contains that is immediately incorrect. It's a bad argument. Okay, so here's an example of the false dilemma fallacy. There are only two kinds of people in this world, people who love Phoebe Bridgers and people who hate music. Sadly, this is not true, right? There is a third type of person who both loves music and unfortunately does not love Phoebe Bridgers, even though she is so wonderful. Okay? So that is a false dilemma fallacy. It's an incorrect argument. Does that make sense to us? It's claiming that there's only two options to choose from, but really there's a third. It's like you have X or Y, take one or the other, but really there's a Z hidden away that they're not telling you about. Okay? Another example from like I guess this was from like a political campaign back in the day. It was like, USA, love it or leave it. You have those two options, right? When really there's a third option. If you don't like it, maybe you should run for office. Help promote change, right? There's There's not just two options. It's not just black and white. Okay. Another example that I stole from the internet somewhere. Stacy spoke out against socialism, so she must be a fascist. Right? That's absolutely not the case. Maybe there is a third political party that Stacy belongs to, or something. Different political viewpoint, right? So it's just not black and white. It's pretty easy to spot this fallacy when you're looking for it, but I'm sure you've heard phrases like this before, like you have this or this. Only this or this is true, but really there's a third option. So that is the false dilemma fallacy. It's a fallacy because it's an incorrect argument. You cannot trust it. Whatever somebody is saying that contains this fallacy is immediately incorrect. Are you good with that? Okay. All right. Next fallacy. This one has a Latin word name called Adpopulum, which is Latin for to the populace, or to the people, or to the popularity. And for that reason, popularity, it's also called the bandwagon fallacy, like everybody's riding on the bandwagon for some purpose. And the Adpopulum fallacy is all about people claiming that something is true. You assume that this thing is true, or it's good, or it's fine to do, just because other people agree with it. And that's the key way to spot the Adpopulum fallacy. Just because other people agree with it is it good. So it's like, here is the populace. They all love thing X. Like so many of them love thing X. And then the Adpopulum fallacy is to conclude that, okay, so many people like thing X. X must be good. When in reality, I think you can think of plenty of examples from history where that's a horrible idea, right? So that is the Adpopulum fallacy. You'll see this a lot in advertisements. So for example, like drink Gatorade because it's what all the professional athletes drink to stay hydrated, right? When in reality, that's not a good argument, right? Maybe they're just drinking it because it's for free and it's sitting on the sidelines and that's all they have. But they maybe prefer something else, but they're not allowed to drink it. Okay? That is the Adpopulum fallacy. Doing something or liking something, claiming that it's good just because a bunch of other people think it's good. All right? Another example, Jimi Hendrix, he played a lot of Fender Stratocasters, and so my life won't be complete without one. I must love one too. It must be the greatest guitar ever. I might believe that, honestly, but it's definitely a fallacy. It's not a good argument in favor of that, right? It's just because somebody else likes it, I shouldn't have to like it, right? And I'm sure you've experienced this before. Like, my parents think this thing, therefore I must think this thing too. And that's their argument in favor of that viewpoint. And that is a horrible issue, right? That is, again, the bandwagon fallacy. Just believing something because other people like it, rather than making up your own mind for it, right? So that's not a good way to argue that something is good, because maybe everyone is just wrong, right? That's the idea. Any questions about that? Adpopulum fallacy. Bandwagon fallacy. So I just have a bunch of examples of fallacies for us, and then I'll give you a question or two about them to see if you remember. So the next one is called circular reasoning. Maybe you've heard of this one before. It's a kind of a common term. Circular reasoning is when, like, you're arguing something and you kind of assume the thing you're arguing as you're arguing it, which sounds like it would be easy to notice, but it's not, sadly. So circular reasoning, it's when you repeat your assumption, the thing that you repeat your conclusion as your assumption, I guess is what I should be saying. But repeat your assumption as your conclusion is another way of saying it. It's like the argument ends up looking like this, like assume X is good, and then they use that assumption to conclude, therefore, X is good. Which obviously doesn't seem right, yeah? It's also called begging the question. That's the informal way of talking about this fallacy. Like, you're begging the question. You're not telling me anything of substance, okay? So here are some examples of circular reasoning, like this picture that I stole from the internet. It's kind of a funny one. It's like, I'm not voting for Bernie because he can't win because not enough people are voting for him. See how that's a circular argument? And so, obviously, that's not a good one. It's using itself. So, here's some quotes I stole from the internet. Opium induces sleep because it has a soporific quality. This is usually how you'll find circular reasoning. It's people hiding behind large words. So soporific just means causing sleep, right? So opium induces sleep because it induces sleep. That's not an argument. You see that? That's kind of funny. So that's circular reasoning. I think here's one that I made up, of course. Everyone wants to buy Phoebe's new album because it's the hottest album this season, right? That's, again, not an argument. It's like everyone wants to buy it because everyone wants to buy it. It's not telling you anything of substance. You see that? So it's not really arguing anything at all. It's just making a claim. Okay? And yeah, usually you're going to see this like hidden behind large flowery words, and don't let those convince you of something. Break it all down. So here's a very long sentence that I will read, and let's try to spot the circular reasoning inside of it. So, all right, this is like somebody's argument. To allow every man an unbounded freedom of speech must always be, on the whole, advantageous to the state, for it is highly conducive to the interests of the community that each individual should enjoy a liberty perfectly unlimited of expressing his sentiments. So first of all, you have to think about what this is even talking about. It's an argument in favor of freedom of speech, unbounded freedom of speech, right? It must always be, on the whole, advantageous to the state. It's like, all right, it's a good thing. Freedom of speech is a good thing because it is highly conducive to the interests of the community that each individual should enjoy a liberty perfectly unlimited of expressing his sentiments. This is just saying, because it's a good thing for people to be able to have freedom of speech. So, again, freedom of speech is a good thing because it's a good thing that people have freedom of speech, or because having freedom of speech would be good. You see the circularity there? It's a bit silly. So, that is the idea. Are there any questions about that? I'm sure you've seen this a lot in real life. It's another very common fallacy. And again, it immediately ruins the argument. Anytime you see it, it's like, this is not a good argument anymore. I cannot trust it. Argue in a different way, please. Otherwise, I'm not believing you. All right. So those previous examples of fallacies were called informal fallacies. And so they're kind of like, they occur in real life. They occur when people are talking in English. This is more of a formal fallacy. It's called denying the antecedent. And when you have a formal fallacy, there's like hardcore logic involved. That's why they separate the two. So this one is a logic error, not just you're saying the wrong thing error. So denying the antecedent, it's a formal fallacy. And here is the setup for this kind of fallacy. You're reasoning like this. There's you're making an argument which has assumptions and a conclusion, right? So they make the assumption that if P is true, then Q is true. So they're assuming P implies Q. And then they're concluding, based on that assumption, that if not P, then not Q. So translated to logic land, it's like, if not P, then not Q must be true. And so they're using this assumption to claim this thing. And in reality, those are not logically equivalent statements. If you draw the truth table for both of those, you'll notice that there are columns that are not the same. And so it's not a valid argument, okay? So there's a validity issue there, and so you can't just use this if to prove this if. It is true, though, if you think about it, if you draw it out, P implies Q is in fact logically equivalent to not Q implies not P. If you draw both of these truth tables out, they are the same. So you could assume this and conclude this. Totally fine. But if you don't flip them, then this one's forgetting to flip them. This is not equivalent. Okay? So here's an example of denying the antecedent. It's here are the two assumptions, like assumption 1 and assumption 2, and here is the one conclusion. So it's like assume these two things, and then use those to conclude this one thing. And we'll notice that it follows this setup. They're just assuming the not P as well. So here's the first assumption. If you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. That's a true statement, right? If you are a ski instructor, so here's the P. If you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. That's our Q. And then assume you are not a ski instructor, okay? That is assuming not P is true, right? Because P is you are a ski instructor. You are not a ski instructor is not P. And then conclusion is therefore not Q. Therefore, you don't have a job. You see that? You have no job, not Q. I think it's pretty easy to say that this is an invalid argument, but depending on the words involved, it might be hard to notice otherwise. So if you are a ski instructor, then you have a job. Assume you're not a ski instructor, so assume the not P, then you're trying to conclude not Q, which is obviously wrong. Therefore, you have no job if you're not a ski instructor. Silly, right? You could be a teacher and still have a job. You see that that is not a valid argument there. And so this is a formal fallacy. It was an error of logic. It doesn't work out. Any questions about that? This is probably a harder one to notice because you have to build up the logical symbols and things and try to pick out what's really being argued. But that is an example of a formal fallacy. All right. Yeah, let's keep on trucking. Another informal fallacy. They're mostly informal fallacies that I'm talking about today. This one is called tu quoque, and it's another Latin term. The logicians really like their Latin roots. So this is Latin for you too. So they have tu in Latin too. So it's Latin for you too, or you also. And it's kind of when you flip back the argument on somebody else. So here's the idea. Also called appeal to hypocrisy, which is interesting. What it does is it doesn't argue anything at all. So when you're using the tu quoque fallacy, if you see it, somebody's trying to distract you from the real argument. They're trying to pretend or point out that the person who is making the argument is really a hypocrite, and they're trying to deflect their own blame. Okay? So the easiest example for this is pick some arbitrary country that we don't, as the U.S., have good relations with, like Russia or China or something. And so here's a very standard example of what happens when we don't like something that Russia does, for example. So the U.S. criticizes Russia for some human rights violation, insert your favorite one here, and then Russia responds by telling the U.S. that, hey, you remember South America, or you remember all these other things that you did wrong as a country? Don't tell me what to do. So Russia responds by reminding that the U.S. has done its fair share of human rights violations. Okay? So this is not a correct argument coming from Russia, right? The idea is they're trying to deflect their own blame when really they still are to blame. Yes, they did something wrong. They should be blamed for it. And they're trying to say, well, U.S., you did bad things too. Why are you telling me anything? It's not an argument, okay? Because, sure, the U.S. has done bad things, but they can still call out other people for doing bad things, right? You can be a hypocrite and still be correct. So that is the idea. You can be a hypocrite and still be right. And so that's why it's also called the appeal to hypocrisy. Okay, so it's like you did a bad thing, or somebody did a bad thing, you're shaming them, and they try to flip the argument back around on you. That is not a good counter argument. Okay, that is a fallacy. They can still be to blame, even if you did that bad thing in the past. Maybe you've learned from it, and that's why you're telling them that it's a bad idea, right? So that is the tu quoque fallacy. Any questions about that? Again, it's not a good argument. It's an invalid argument. All right. Yeah, if we're still good, I think I have 2 more, and then maybe 3 more, and then I have some questions for you to try. All right. Next one is called the genetic fallacy. This is a bit more vague. It's harder to explain, but the idea is the genetic fallacy, when you see it, it's basing their argument. Somebody's trying to argue something based on the history. It's like its roots, its genes, the history of some idea rather than, or its origin. When in reality, we are so far removed from that time when that thing first came out, or that old usage, that that idea is no longer relevant to us. So it's talking about the past, essentially. Talking about the past when the past is no longer relevant. When it's no longer relevant. And so if it's no longer relevant, you can't really use it in an argument anymore. So here's the setup usually of the bad argument with a genetic fallacy in it. It's like something used to be perceived to be bad, or it used to really be a bad thing, but times have changed so much that old way of perceiving it no longer applies, and it's no longer a bad thing anymore. So here's an example I stole from the internet. I don't actually know if it's true. I would be very interested in knowing if this is true, but let's just pretend it is. Here's their argument. It's like, you're not going to wear a wedding ring, are you? Don't you know that the wedding ring originally symbolized ankle chains worn by women to prevent them from running away from their husbands? I would have not thought you would be a party to such a sexist practice. So this is an argument based on the origin of a wedding ring. And I don't know if this is true at all. I'd love to know if somebody can Wikipedia very quickly. But assuming this is even true at all, and maybe it is, maybe this is really true about wedding rings, I think we can all argue that a wedding ring does not symbolize that anymore to anyone, right? It symbolizes the love that two people have for each other. That's all, yeah? And their commitment to their marriage. That is what a wedding ring means today. It has nothing to do with the original interpretation of it, assuming that really is true. Does that make sense? So again, it's a bad argument. It's talking about the source of something, the origin of something, when that doesn't really apply anymore. Nobody thinks about it that way. Okay? That's the genetic fallacy. And here's another example I stole from the internet. It's like, here's the argument. This news story about the Purple Party candidate must be fake since it was made by XYZ News, and we know that XYZ News is owned by somebody who is against the Purple Party. So again, it's talking about the origin of the data rather than the facts involved, rather than what's really going on. It is possible, even though XYZ News is kind of anti-Purple Party, even though the owner of XYZ News is anti-Purple Party, maybe the thing that they're reporting about this Purple Party candidate is true. That maybe that person really did do a bad thing or whatever. That is okay, okay? That's the idea. It has nothing to do, like maybe the journalists, I would assume most journalists like to be truthful. And so it has nothing to do with the origin of the news station. Origins have no impact on truth, assuming they are reporting the truth. It's like if your favorite news station that nobody likes reported something and they have a live camera feed and then nobody believes it even though they have a live feed of the thing, right? Has nothing to do with the origin anymore. Okay? That's the genetic fallacy. Any questions about that? So when you're talking about the past or the origin of something, the source of the information, when in reality that has nothing to do with the information being presented, with the idea that's being argued. That's definitely a harder and more vague one. I don't even have a picture for this slide. Okay, if we're all right with that, I have two more, and then I'll stop frying your brain on fallacies. This is a very common one. It's called the straw man fallacy. It's used a lot in real life, and so I'm sure you might have heard of it. It's a very common fallacy that people who have not studied logic know about. It's called the straw man fallacy. And another more informal way of putting it is like you're putting words in someone's mouth. I'm sure you've heard somebody say that before. You're putting words in my mouth. Words in someone's mouth. Okay, so this is when you are the person who's using the fallacy, when they are trying to attack a position that their opponent doesn't really have. Like they're trying to argue against something that their opponent really isn't even arguing, okay? And so they essentially what they're doing, the reason it's called the straw man fallacy is because you're turning the other person's argument into another one that can be easily defeated and knocked down like it's made of straw. So that's why it's called the straw man fallacy. You are trying to pretend that somebody is arguing one thing when really they're arguing a different one. And the thing that you're pretending that they're arguing is much easier to knock down. Okay? So here's an example. Here's a couple examples. I don't know if this is real. Maybe it's made up. But let's pretend that this is a closing argument from a lawyer in a bank robbery case. Maybe it's true. I don't know. So here is the argument of that lawyer. He said, I submit to you that if you can't take this evidence and find these defendants guilty, these people who apparently robbed a bank, then we might as well open all the banks up and say, come on and get the money, boys, because we'll never be able to convict them. So the person is trying to make the argument, this lawyer is trying to make the argument that we better convict these specific people in this specific case, otherwise we will never ever be able to convict anyone ever again who robbed a bank. We might as well just open up all the banks and let everybody get the money. When in reality, that has nothing to do with the trial, right? That is not a good argument because, well, maybe the evidence against these bank robbers is all circumstantial and they really should be let out, right? There's definitely some stuff that we don't know about that is not in this argument. This is not a good argument because obviously it's very obvious that nobody wants to open up all the banks and give out all the money in the banks, right? Nobody wants to do that. Nobody's arguing that. This person is trying to attack a position that is not really being held. It's a very easily defeatable position, right? It's very easy to argue that we should never open up all the banks and give out all the money inside. If only, though. Any questions about that idea? It's like the lawyer is putting words in the defense's mouth when really they're just trying to get those two people who supposedly robbed the bank out free. Not everyone. Okay? That's a straw man argument. Another example of a straw man argument is these two. I think it's person B is making the straw man argument. So person A is like, the children's winter concert at the school should include non-Christmas songs too. So that's person A arguing that. And then person B comes along with a straw man argument and says, you won't be happy until Christmas songs are banned from being played on the radio. When in reality, that has nothing to do with what person A is saying, right? They're just trying to mix things up in the winter concert for these kids, right? Because maybe not everybody celebrates Christmas or something. But this person B is like, you must hate Christmas and not want it to be on the radio even. When in reality, that's not what person A is saying at all. They're just trying to be inclusive to all the kids at the school. Okay? So everybody see why that's a straw man argument? Person B is putting words into person A's mouth. Any questions about this one? So this is a very common one that you'll see in the wild. Straw man argument. We good? We have just one left. One last one to try, and then I'll give you some time to figure out some examples. We'll have some questions. So this is by far the easiest one to notice, and it's also the most common one on the internet. It's called the ad hominem fallacy. And again, logicians love their Latin, and so this is Latin for to the man or to the person. And what it's doing is it's flipping around the argument, and it's not really arguing anything again. It's attacking the arguer instead of the argument. And so you're essentially insulting somebody instead of arguing against what they're saying. And so you're just attacking somebody to support your own conclusion. Okay? So here are some very easy examples. I think you can imagine that this is very easy to find on the internet. It's like, Jones likes a football team from the East Coast. Clearly, he's unfit to be a police chief in California. You see that? So this is trying to make the link, this argument. It's an ad hominem fallacy. It's attacking this Jones person for liking a football team and arguing that they can't be a police chief, when in reality, those two things have nothing to do with each other. You're attacking the man rather than his qualifications to become a police chief. You see that? So that's a very easy thing to spot. You're making a horrible argument. You're just saying, like, you suck, and then pretending that gets you out of arguing against somebody. Okay? And here is a very good example, I would say, of ad hominem, that it is an invalid argument, but if you were on a jury, you would probably agree with this argument. You'd believe it, right? So this is why I'm teaching this to you. This is a horrible argument still. All right? You cannot trust it. Here's like a lawyer saying this. You cheated and lied to your wife, but you expect the jury to believe you now? That is again attacking the person rather than whatever they're on trial for. Do you see that? This is an ad hominem fallacy, and it is an incorrect argument. Because, sure, maybe this person really did cheat and lie to their wife, but maybe this trial has nothing to do with that. They're trying to make this person look like a bad person, when maybe maybe it's been many years since this happened, and they're very, very sorry about it or something, okay? Maybe this has nothing to do with the case. And so you have to think about it. If I were on a jury, I would be maybe agreeing with the lawyer here. But again, you have to notice that it's a fallacy. Maybe the case has nothing to do with this. Maybe it's just about money or something. Who knows? So that cannot be applied. It's not a good argument. It's attacking the person rather than trying to argue that they're guilty of some crime. You see that? That's the key thing. And then this one, maybe you've heard it a lot. This is technically an ad hominem fallacy. It's not a good argument, even though maybe your parents have used it with you a lot. It's like, you're too young to understand right now. That is, again, attacking the person rather than telling them, giving them a good reason why this thing is happening, why they think something. Okay. Any questions about that? It's very easy to notice. And again, it's a fallacy. So any argument that contains this is wrong. The person needs to fix it. Try a different argument, because otherwise you shouldn't believe them. We good with all that? Any questions about any of those fallacies we've talked about so far? Can you keep them all straight in your mind? I can go back to some of them if you would like, but I do have some questions for you now. So here is oops, I forgot to delete those. Here is a tweet from a little while ago. And there is a fallacy in this tweet, I claim. It's like, this is the tweet. Where would you like to see your meat come from? A chemical factory on an industrial estate or a green field in the middle of the countryside? So here are your options. Let's go to the buy clicker page. And please take a minute to say hi to the people next to you and try to come up with a good argument. Oh no, is the internet not working for me? Oh shoot. Well, I guess I'll have to fix that before I let you go off. Sorry about that. Is it just the class website, or is it the entire internet? Okay, it's the entire internet then, on my computer. This was a problem yesterday too. Oh, there it goes. All right, I'm going to assume it's happy. Sure. Okay, cool. So here is your question. Take like a minute or two to discuss amongst yourselves and see if you can figure out which fallacy this tweet has in it. Maybe there's multiple. Who knows? Pick whichever one you think is right. I have one more after this too. And if you forget what one of these was, you didn't write down in your notes or something, just shout out and I can give you a quick reminder of what it was. All right, a couple more seconds. Get your answers in. And then we'll take a look at what we're thinking. Was it obvious? All right. I don't remember the account that posted this. Probably for the best. Who knows what they were thinking. Ooh, look at us. We are not sure. That's good. I'm glad. So, let's see here. We're thinking D, but we definitely don't have a majority. So, yeah. I guess, yeah, let's try to break it down. I think the easiest thing to notice, the answer is D, by the way, but let me try and argue and explain why. It's like, what's it saying? Where would you like to see your meat come from? A chemical factory or a green field? Do you see how it's giving you two options? That is false dilemma. That is the trademark of false dilemma. You have two options, but really there's a third. It's like chemical factory or a green field in the middle of the countryside. We live in Fresno, so we understand that there is a third option. It's like a brown field out in the middle of the city. That is the third option, for example. So false dilemma. This is saying you only have these two options, but in reality, there's everything in between. You see that? Let's see. Let me try and say some other things. Let's see here. I guess it depends on what you're saying. You can kind of argue some of these things. It's like maybe a false dilemma kind of is putting words in somebody's mouth. If there's somebody if there's somebody arguing something else, but there's only one person arguing here. Ad hominem, I don't think it could be this one because there's no humans being like told that they're bad people. It's like maybe if it was saying you're a bad person if you have meat made in a chemical factory, then that would be an ad hominem fallacy, something like that. So that's at least why it's false dilemma. Are there any questions about that? Is there one that you thought it was that you're still not sure why D is the best answer? All right. Here's one where there really are essentially two answers, and you could argue either one. So I'm excited to see which one you think. So let me try this. Let me start this all over again, and let me explain the question. So there's a fallacy in this Facebook comment. I stole this at the start of the pandemic from like one of the Fresno news accounts. They posted this. And so they posted a video of President Biden saying something about getting your COVID shot back when that was first being offered to people. He's like, get your shot today. There's no time to waste. Nationwide, cases are still rising, especially among the unvaccinated. And to this, somebody on Facebook argued, they said, BS, even the vaccinated are getting COVID. And so this argument right here contains a fallacy. It's trying to counter this argument. Could you find what the issue is? Which fallacy is the one from the Facebook comment? There are a couple valid options, I would say. A few more seconds. All right, that is my timer. Let's take a look at what we were thinking. All right. Oh, look at us. Do we have a majority? 9. Not quite a majority, darn. But we're thinking C. Nice. With some A, B's, and D's, but no E's. It's good that there's no E's because there is no, like, this person is not saying, you suck, President. That would have been the ad hominem argument. So yeah, it can't be E. But which of these could it be? So Adpopulum is, we're talking about this one, right? There's a fallacy here. Is this an Adpopulum fallacy? That's the bandwagon fallacy. Like, all these people are doing this, so I should do it too. This is kind of anti-bandwagon, right? It's like all these people are getting vaccinated, but I'm not. So I don't think it could be Adpopulum. I don't see options here. It's like, there really is, it can't be a false dilemma either, because it's like you either get a vaccine or you don't get a vaccine. There really are only 2 options there, right? So it can't be false dilemma, but I think it can be B or C, depending on how you think about it. It's like he's like saying, you too, you are getting, even you guys who are getting vaccinated are getting COVID too. I don't need my shot. That could be tu quoque, I would say. Turning the argument back around, like, why should I listen to you because you're still getting COVID? That's possible. And then also strawman is possible. And this would be the one that I would probably choose. Probably be the more correct answer in my mind, at least. But I would give you credit for either of these, obviously. Assuming you would argue why you thought it was this. But I think strawman is a strong candidate for a fallacy here because this is an argument about you should get a vaccine because cases are rising, especially among the unvaccinated, right? That's what the president said. And this is putting words in the president's mouth because the president, Biden, was not saying anything about the vaccinated not getting COVID, right? Nobody was ever saying that. They were saying it's going to improve your outcome if you do get it, getting the vaccine, right? And so this person is arguing against that idea, saying, like, why should I get the vaccine? I'm not, you guys are getting COVID too, when in reality, that's not what this is arguing. It's arguing for people to be vaccinated because cases are rising. That was the argument. This is not talking about that argument anymore. You see that? That is why I would say it's a straw man fallacy. And so either of these works, but if I were forced to pick between the two, I'd probably say C. Any questions about that? So this is attacking an argument that was not being made. Nobody was trying to say that the vaccinated weren't getting COVID. All right. Luckily, all of this is mostly behind us now, right? Okay. Any questions about any of that? Because I have a new topic for the rest of today, and it's kind of not the same as fallacy stuff. We're good to move on? All right. So for the last few minutes of class today, I want to talk about crime and security, all the bad things in the world. Not so much arguments anymore. All right? I just want to give you some examples of like all of the bad technology stuff that's happened. Right? We have so much good that we get from all this technology that we have today, but bad things have happened thanks to the technology as well. So I'll give you some examples of that, and then also just like you have new ways to like have your identity stolen, have bad things happen to you thanks to stuff like the internet. So how can we make sure that that does not happen to us? Okay, so let's talk about all that, and I guess we should talk about like the original idea of crime on the internet. Let's talk about hacking. So back in the day, and it still is in certain contexts, hacking used to be a positive term, not a negative one. It just meant that, like, if you were a hacker, you were somebody who was good with computers. Like, you were writing software that was getting the job done. And that actually is still true today in the software engineering world. People say hack to mean that you just did a good job with, you did something very wonky, but it worked out well. It's like the class website, I threw it together in a week one summer, and it's just a huge hack job, something like that. That is a positive idea, okay? So hacking used to mean something positive, but obviously now it doesn't, at least to most people, because computers started to be connected to each other, and so people were able to cause a lot of damage because of that interconnectedness. Now you, in the comfort of your own home, could connect to the Pentagon and mess with their stuff or something. Okay, so like the very first example of hacking is before personal computers existed. It was called phone phreaking, and they spelled that in a weird way. But what this was like the very first example of hacking interconnected stuff. Before computers were interconnected, what was the only way of interconnecting things electronically? It was like phone lines, telegraph wires. So these people, they hacked phone boxes. So hopefully you've at least seen movies. I don't know, like, do I have to explain what payphones are to us? Have we seen payphones before? Do we know what they used to be at least? Not very common anymore, but here's a payphone. It's in a box, right, on the side of the road, and you can place calls in there if you give it money. Like you put some quarters in the little slot, and then you can call your mom or something to come pick you up. And so this was, of course, connected to the telephone line, because it was a telephone. And what phone phreaking was, people back in the day, back in the 70s, they made devices to fake long-distance routing tones, which is funny. So you used to have to pay more money to call across the country rather than in Fresno. That's definitely not a thing anymore. But these people noticed that when you put a coin in the phone booth to like say that you get more time with your call, it made a little noise. The phone projected a little noise into the phone network, and that's how they knew you put a quarter in. So another place that you could inject noise is in the receiver of the phone. And so these people made a device that played that exact same tone that said, you just put a quarter in, when in reality you didn't do anything at all. So they just injected noise into there, and they were able to make free long-distance calls because of it. So that was just a cute little example. It's mostly innocuous. There are funny stories on the internet of like somebody in San Francisco calling the Pope. Like they made a long-distance call across the ocean for free using this device. And so that was like the start of all of this, the start of hacking. And back in the day, it was mostly innocuous, not meant to like disrupt anything, just for fun, just to say that you could do it. Next comes computer worms and viruses, because now that you have the internet, computers actually being interconnected over phone lines, then you could start transmitting data, and that's a problem. So there's a difference between worms and viruses that might not be apparent, so let me just define both of those. A virus is a bad program that you need to download first, and you have to activate it yourself accidentally. So like you have to double click a file that you downloaded from a very shady website. You thought it was like a song or a movie or something, but in reality it was a program. So that's a virus. You have to start it yourself. And then it just takes over your computer and it does bad things. A worm is essentially a virus that can multiply. And it also doesn't need to be double clicked or something. It's a malicious program that is capable of self-replication, so it can give itself to other people, and it can also self-activate. It can double-click itself and make all the bad things happen without the user being involved. So it's very easy for it to spread to multiple computers that way. So viruses, downloaded and activated manually. Worms self-replicate, automatically download themselves, automatically activate themselves. Okay? And of course, the internet is what allowed these to be a thing. Okay? Another fun idea is that companies, they hire hackers these days still. They still like hackers. They hire them to test their own security so that bad hackers can't get in, which is kind of funny. So you could be a legitimate hacker for a real company and get paid for it if you would like. That could be your future. And yeah, so bad things happened with all of this. You could now write a virus that can like steal a lot of personal information, a lot of financial information, and that makes people afraid. So let's move on. Let's talk about some good examples of viruses and worms and just bad things. So the first one that I want to bring up is called Stuxnet. It was a worm, so it was able to self-multiply, self-replicate, self-activate, all those words. What it did was it targeted a control system that controlled heavy machinery, and it like told the machines to spin so fast that they broke themselves, something like that. That's what it was. And it only infected specific computers, and those computers were uranium enrichment computers, ones that controlled machinery that enriched uranium in Iran. So this was a very, very targeted worm. It multiplied among only the computers that were enriching uranium that were in Iran, and it broke them so that they could not make nuclear things, I guess. That was the Stuxnet worm. And the rumor is, and probably true, the rumor is that the U.S. and Israel, they built this worm together, like the governments did that, so that they could harm the nuclear, like, so that they could keep Iran from becoming a nuclear country. That's the idea. So, yeah, that is a good example of a worm. It doesn't have to target every computer. It can just target specific ones. So that's Stuxnet. Another example is just a big breach. I don't know if any of us were affected by this, but it affected quite a few people, maybe our parents. Back in 2013, there was a Target breach, if you remember that. And this is very fun. A lot of stuff got taken, a lot of information got taken out of Target's databases. And the funny thing is, it wasn't even Target that got hacked. So I should just say that. It wasn't even Target that got hacked at the start. Like they got their way in a very roundabout way, the hackers. It wasn't actually Target that got hacked. Super funny. Originally, at least. Eventually, they got hacked. Originally. And so what happened was a business that worked on the HVAC machines for Target, the heating, air conditioning, and refrigeration machines, like they did maintenance on those things. This Fazio Mechanical company worked on those. And so they were given access to Target systems so they could like log in and do stuff. Somebody at this company got hacked using a route called phishing. Maybe you've heard of that. If you like have a job, you have to like take training to stop phishing and all that. So what phishing is, it's when you try to get sensitive information from somebody by pretending to be somebody else. So you make a fake website that looks like Microsoft's login, but really it's your shady website, and they get your password like that. So that's called phishing. And so an unfortunate employee at this place that was doing work for Target, they got sent a phishing email. They thought it was legit. They clicked on it, and they installed a virus on their machine. And maybe it was the laptop that they took to Target or something when they did their work. So this virus, it stole usernames and passwords, and eventually they were able to get usernames and passwords for Target's software, Target's mainframe systems or whatever. And at that point, once they were inside of Target systems, they were able to access credit card data and then perform a lot of credit card fraud. So maybe you know somebody who was affected by this. I had a student last semester who was affected by this, surprisingly. It's a common thing that happened to a lot of people because we all go to Target. So yeah, a lot of credit card fraud. Banks had to spend $200 million just to fix the issues, to reissue credit cards to people who got their account data stolen, as well as like having to deal with all the credit card fraud, all the stuff that was bought that shouldn't have been bought, right? So that was a big, big breach. And again, it's the internet's fault. If we weren't connecting all these computers together, this would never have happened. Should we get rid of the internet, though? Any questions, comments about that? That's a fun one. What else? Yeah. So how do we prevent this kind of problem? There's always a cat and mouse game between hackers and people who are trying to prevent hacking. So one way to do that is to up your security. And one way to up your security is to use biometric features. And so this is like bio comes from the idea of like, instead of remembering a password, let's just have people log in with their fingerprints or your face, right? iPhones have done both of those. Or your iris shape. That's unique among different people, etc. That's the idea. So because like different people have different fingerprints, let's use that as like your password, because you're never going to lose your finger most likely, right? That is the idea there. And so this is used in a lot of places where there's really, really top security, like when airport personnel come in through the door or something. Unfortunately, like again, there's a cat and mouse game between hackers. Biometric features, they can be fooled. You can make an imprint of somebody's fingerprint and like pretend it was yours, but it's definitely harder to do that. And every day these things get more and more complicated, and so it's harder to cheat the system. But that's one way that this problem is being solved, just so that you don't have to have a password anymore. And so it's impossible to have somebody steal it. And then also, we've talked about this a little bit, just when you go places on the internet, it's all of your traffic is encrypted. It's called TLS. It's when you go somewhere, like you go to Amazon, you want to buy something. If you look in your web browser's bar, it's like HTTPS : / or whatever. That's the idea. And it's like Amazon.com. That S stands for secure. It stands for transport layer security. And I think I've shown you this already. Like, you can click on any website that you're on that is secure. It has this little lock icon. It's like, tell me why. This was verified by somebody. Give me more information. And it'll talk about like the reason why this all is trusted. It's like, the class website is trusted because it has a public key and we're using this kind of security. All that kind of stuff. And this is why I trust the website. Okay, there it is, TLS AES right there. Connection encrypted. So that's the idea. That's why, luckily, we can go places and our internet traffic is kept secure. And it uses cryptography for that idea. It encrypts your data being sent to somebody's website using RSA, like we've talked about, or other things. The class website is using RSA. And yeah, any website that has HTTPS : / at the front, that S means it's using TLS, transport layer security, which makes sure that your traffic is secured when you're talking to somebody. It's only the people in between, and it's only the people at the ends, your computer and the computer you're connecting to on the internet, that you're trusting. Everybody else can only see garbled data. It's all encrypted because they don't have the keys. All right, I think I have one slide and then I have one more question for us, and that'll be most of it today. So here's an interesting idea, an interesting thought. There are a lot of companies in certain countries, like this one, where they are required to include backdoors to systems so that law enforcement people can get in and not have to see somebody's data, even though they're not that person. Okay, so law enforcement agencies, they don't like it when things are encrypted so much that it cannot be broken. So they sometimes ask companies to not do perfect encryption, which is maybe unfortunate. So for example, a murder investigation by the FBI, they had to wait a long time because they were trying to unlock an iPhone, and Apple's really big on security. They encrypted something that it takes a very long time even for a government to break that encryption. And so a lot of countries are asking companies that have offices there to include backdoors to their system so that they can immediately get in and get that data off of that phone, for example. That's the idea, okay? And so the question I have for you is that okay? Is it okay for a country or some other entity to ask a company to include a backdoor for law enforcement purposes? So let's have that debate. And so let us, instead of going to the ByClicker page, let us please go to the Written Ice page, and I'll clear it out for us. We'll have a little mini debate, and that'll be most of it for the rest of the day. So now it's all cleared out. So please remember how to get your group number, because I'm going to split you off into groups again. You can work with the people next to you, but remember, you just click the submit button and it gives you a number. And I'm going to give you a different thing to do depending on if you're an even group or an odd group. So here's your debate question. Should companies be required to include backdoors into their software or into their systems for law enforcement to use? So please try to come up with 2 good arguments, either in favor or against, and here's how I'll break it down. If you're an odd numbers group, you are going to argue that no, this should never be a thing. Backdoors are bad. We should not let them be in our systems. If you are an even numbered group, I'm forcing to argue yes. Come up with 2 good reasons why it's a very good idea to have backdoors into systems, into software. Okay, so based on your stance that I've forced you to have, please come up with 2 good arguments. Write them down, discuss with the people next to you, and just make one big group. Totally fine. And let's see what we're thinking. I'll give you a few minutes to discuss and talk about this. tell me why or why not it's a good idea to include these backdoors. About a minute and a half more to get your 2 good arguments in, please. Then we'll discuss. All right, let's see what we're thinking. Hopefully my internet still works so that I can actually see your responses. So, yeah, thank you guys for doing this. So, yeah, very good argument in favor of backdoors is it's helpful for their investigations for the law enforcement. If you're trusting that they're gonna they're gonna get a warrant and do it all to the books, and if they need the stuff, they're really gonna ask for it and do it all right, then maybe they should have that ability. Who knows? If you're against it, though, this is a great argument against it. If you have, I'm glad you came up with this group 67. This is a very one of the most powerful arguments I've seen, I think, It's like, if you include a backdoor for law enforcement, who's to say that an attacker cannot find that same backdoor? Now you've made more vulnerable software because you were forced to include that. You see why that could be a problem? That's an issue. Okay. Yeah. So great idea there. Let's see. Look into potential data to help them solve crimes. You could solve more crimes if you're able to get into this data. So we should let law enforcement have them. Yeah. Yeah. Just in case. Just in case of emergencies. Good ideas there. And yeah, if law enforcement can get in, anybody can get in. I like this. So yeah, any questions, comments about what we've been saying here? I think those are the two standard arguments I've seen. It's like, for, it's like, the argument is, yes, we should have this stuff because it's going to help with law enforcement protecting us against bad people. And then against is like, bad people can still do whatever they need to do. They can still download whatever app they need to do perfect encryption. So why not just give everybody no backdoors? Like, what's the point? Because the people who wanted to encrypt stuff are still going to do it anyway. That's the idea there. All right. So nice work there. For my last slide of the day, let's go and talk about let's ask our boys this question. It's like, why should we do this? Should we have backdoors for law enforcement? And let's see here. If we ask Kant, he's gonna use the word always in his question. It's like, should we always give things to law enforcement when they need it to solve their cases? And honestly, this could go either way. This is one of those rare cases where Kant might say one thing or the other. And he might say yes because, like, yes, we should always trust law enforcement to do the right thing. He could also say no because Kant is very much about personal freedom. It's like, let's not give these people what they need. It's not necessary. They should find another way of getting this information. They should break the encryption themselves. I don't want to give up my freedom just to help law enforcement. So Kant could say either thing, I would say. And then Mill, again, usually utilitarians can argue in either direction depending on how you feel that day. So you'd be looking for the utility, right? Mill would be looking for the utility in all of this. So why should we have a backdoor versus why should we not have a backdoor? Okay. So an argument 4 is like, this will help convict bad people. We'll get the data on them faster, or maybe we wouldn't be able to have that data at all otherwise. So this will help convict people and make the world safer. That's an argument 4. Maybe that wins out, and that would cause a utilitarian to believe, yes, we should do this. We should involve these backdoors. We should keep them. Arguments against, though, those could also win out. A good argument against is like, yeah, this is my private information. I don't want anybody to see it. That's not right. That restricts my personal freedoms if you were to do that. If you were to include a backdoor, even if it was for law enforcement. Okay. So yeah, that's what I think our boys would say. Again, there's no right answer on this topic. And so that's why I wanted you to think about both directions. Any questions about any of that? Comments? Heavy stuff, but it's a good topic for a critical thinking class, I would say. So I think that's all that I have for today. No new assignments this week. Don't forget about the midterm next week. So that is all that I have.